A day before my sister's wedding, she charged $12,000 to my card, snapping that I had no life to spend it on anyway. She thought I was just her personal bank. She didn't know I was a risk manager, and I'd already discovered her fiancé was a con artist. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The first sound that cut through the fever-thick haze was the vibration of my phone on the nightstand. It was a vicious, angry buzz, insistent and out of place in the quiet tomb of my bedroom. For 3 days, I had been quarantined in this room, battling a severe case of pneumonia that had settled deep in my lungs, making every breath feel like I was inhaling crushed glass. I was Harriet, 38 years old, and a risk manager at a major bank. My life was, by all accounts, orderly, quiet, and predictable. I was also, at that moment, incredibly weak. I fumbled for the phone, my hand trembling. The light from the screen stabbed at my eyes. It wasn't a call. It was a text message, a bank alert. Fraud alert, a charge of $12,000 has been approved. Vendor, Beautiful Beginnings Reception Services. I stared at the words, my feverish brain struggling to parse them. $12,000. Fraud, that was the only word that registered. This had to be a mistake, a stolen number. I started to dial the bank's fraud department, but my thumb hovered over the keypad. A name lodged itself in my thoughts. Beautiful Beginnings. It sounded so. Saccharine, so? Bridal. A cold dread, sharper than my fever, washed over me. No, she wouldn't. This card wasn't for daily use. It was an emergency card. Years ago, after our parents, Eliza and Charles, had faced a financial crisis, I had set up a separate account. I gave my parents and my younger sister, Jessica, each a card linked to it. I had been explicit. This is for a burst pipe, I had told them, my voice echoing in the memory. This is for an emergency room visit. This is not for shopping. Jessica was getting married tomorrow. My 26-year-old influencer sister. The golden child who had never held a real job, who lived a life curated for a camera lens, funded by my parents and, by extension, me. My fingers, shaking for a different reason now, dialed her number. She picked up on the third ring not with a hello, but with a high, breathless, "What?" The background was filled with shouting, laughter, and music. The rehearsal dinner, the one I was too sick to attend. "Jess," I rasped, my voice sounding alien and rough from disuse and illness. "Jess, I got a bank alert." "Oh my God, Harriet, finally?" Her voice was sharp, annoyed. "I was wondering when you'd see it. The reception hall needed the final payment like now." The casual admission punched the air from my already struggling lungs. "What? Jessica, that was $12,000. You can't just do that. That card is for emergencies." "This is an emergency," she snapped, her voice dripping with the familiar entitlement I had spent a lifetime enabling. "They weren't going to let us have the reception. Did you want me to call you and have you cough all over the phone while you lectured me? I just handled it." "Handled it?" I pushed myself up against the headboard, a coughing fit seizing me. Each hack felt like a hammer blow to my ribs. "Jess, that is my money. You didn't ask. You just took it." There was a pause. I heard her say to someone, "It's just Harriet, hold on." She came back on the line, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. "Harriet, don't act surprised. It's not like you're using it. It's just sitting there like you." I flinched. The words landed with surgical precision. "You don't even have a life to spend it on," she continued, the cruelty casual, effortless. "You just sit in that big, empty house, staring at spreadsheets. I'm actually living my life. This is my wedding, my one perfect day, so just be the good big sister for once and let this go." The line clicked dead. I was left in the crushing silence of my sick room. The only sound was the wheeze of my own breathing. She hadn't just stolen from me. She had articulated my deepest fear, the one I pushed down every time I worked a weekend or canceled plans, that I wasn't a person, I was a utility, a resource, a joyless, lifeless provider for everyone else's dreams. For years, I had been the family's dependable, boring, responsible safety net. I had paid off my parents' mortgage. I had funded Jessica's failed startups, her influencer career, her very existence. And in return, I was summed up in one brutal sentence: you don't even have a life to spend it on. I looked at the phone at the $12,000 alert. I thought of my sister in her beautiful dress, laughing with her friends. I thought of her charming fiancé, Henry, and out of the small, locked file on my laptop, the one my professional instincts had compelled me to create 3 months ago. The fever, the weakness, the hurt, it all evaporated, replaced by something cold, heavy, and clear. It was the feeling I got at work just before I uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. It was the feeling of certainty. Jessica was right about one thing: I did stare at spreadsheets. I was a risk manager. And she, her charming fiancé, and my enabling parents had just made the single greatest miscalculation of their lives. They thought I was just a sister. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The silence in the room was absolute. My breath hitched, but it wasn't from the pneumonia anymore. It was from the sheer, icy audacity. Jessica's words echoed, layering over one another, building a monument to her casual cruelty. You don't even have a life. My shock didn't last long. It was a luxury I couldn't afford, not in my profession and certainly not in my family. Shock calcified, hardening into something else. It was the familiar, metallic click in the back of my brain, the shift from Harriet the sister to Harriet the risk manager. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a high-value, unauthorized transaction, executed with malicious intent. I pulled my laptop from my bag, the cool metal a comfort against my feverish skin. Wincing at the pain in my chest, I propped it on my knees. I didn't need to call my parents, Eliza and Charles. I knew exactly what they would say. They were at the rehearsal dinner, basking in the glow of their perfect daughter's perfect wedding, a wedding I had largely financed. They wouldn't see a $12,000 theft. They would see a minor logistical hurdle, smoothed over. They would see their darling Jessica handling it. My phone rang, and I looked down, expecting Jessica to call back, perhaps to twist the knife further. But it was my mother, Eliza. My thumb hovered, then accepted the call. "Harriet, honey?" Her voice was bright, too bright, and laced with the forced cheer she used when she knew there was a problem. "We missed you so much at the rehearsal. Jessica's dress. Oh, it's just a dream. Henry is a prince." "Mom," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the rasp it held moments before. "Jessica just charged $12,000 to my emergency credit card." A heavy sigh crackled through the phone. Oh dear. Well, I did wonder how she was going to handle that last payment. The reception vendor was being simply awful. "Mom," she stole from me, again. "Harriet, please," Eliza said, her voice dropping into the familiar tones of placation, the sound of 1,000 previous arguments I had lost. "Don't use that word. Stole. It's so? Ugly, she's just stressed. You know how she gets, it's her big day, we are all one family, and this is what family does. You're the one with the good job, you're the stable one. It's just money, Harriet, you'll get it back. Eventually." "And what she said to me," I pressed, the hurt still raw, "that I don't have a life to spend it on. Is that what you all think?" Another sigh, this one impatient. "Oh, Harriet, you know she didn't mean it. She's a bride. They get to be dramatic. Don't be so sensitive. Now I have to go. Charles is about to give his toast. Just let this go, for her, for the family." The line went dead. I closed my eyes. For the family. The motto I had lived my life by. The phrase that had cost me a study abroad program, a down payment on a beach house, and countless nights of sleep. I was the family's pack mule, and I had just been told, in no uncertain terms, that the mule was also a joke. I was utterly, completely alone in this. My own mother had just co-signed the theft and the insult. I turned back to the laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. I pulled up the bank alert. Vendor, Beautiful Beginnings Reception Services. It sounded so, generic so, fake. A risk manager's job isn't just to look at the numbers, it's to see the story behind them. A legitimate, high-end wedding vendor, owed a final payment of $12,000, would have a name. The Grand Oak Estate, Coastal Catering. They wouldn't have a name that sounded like it came from a build-a-business website. My mind went to Henry, the prince. Henry, the 30-year-old entrepreneur who had swept my sister off her feet 6 months ago. Henry, with his 2 white teeth, his leased luxury car, and his complete lack of a verifiable backstory. My family was blinded by his charm. My father, Charles, was impressed by his empty talk of portfolios and acquisitions. My mother, Eliza, just loved that he doted on Jessica. But I wasn't blinded. I was a risk manager, and Henry had set off every alarm bell I had. I opened the encrypted file on my desktop, the one I had created after my first and only long conversation with him. The file I had hoped I would never need to open. Jessica and my parents all thought I was just a lonely workaholic, a passionless numbers cruncher. They thought my job was just a source of an endless river of cash for them to dip into. They were right about one thing. My job was numbers, and I was very, very good at it. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that my job wasn't just to count money. It was to find the thieves. I looked at the bank alert, then at the file. A cold, hard plan began to form, a flowchart of consequences. Jessica thought she was just taking my money. She had no idea she had just given me the one thing I needed to act. She had just given me a case. The foundation of my family was built on a simple, unspoken contract. I was the provider, and they were the recipients. It hadn't always been that way. My father, Charles, was a history teacher, a kind but gentle man. My mother, Eliza, was a nurse, compassionate but with a soft spot for Jessica that bordered on willful blindness. They were good people, but they were financially naive. When their investments collapsed a decade ago, I was 28. I had just been promoted. I stepped in. It started small, a utility bill here, a car repair there. Then it was bigger. I quietly took over their mortgage. I told them it was a refinance, a white lie to protect my father's pride. But my help had an unintended consequence. It allowed them to pour all their remaining resources into Jessica. While I was working 60-hour weeks, Jessica was finding herself. This involved a dropped-out marketing degree, which I'd paid for, a failed jewelry line, which I'd funded, and finally, her career as a micro-influencer. Her work consisted of taking photos in expensive clothes and tagging brands for freebies. I had sacrificed. I gave up the down payment on my own apartment to cover my parents' mortgage. I passed on a prestigious lateral move to our London office because they needed me back home. Every time, Eliza and Charles would say, "Thank you, Harriet. You're so responsible. What would we do without you?" It was a role I grew to resent, yet I was trapped in it. I was the reliable, unfun, stable older sister. The family's walking, talking insurance policy. Then 6 months ago, Henry arrived. I first met him at my parents' house for Sunday dinner. He was devastatingly handsome, I had to admit. He had a perfect smile, a designer watch that looked just a little too flashy, and a grip that was half handshake, half power play. He kissed my mother's hand and called my father sir. They were putty in his hands inside of 10 minutes. Jessica hung on his arm, looking more animated than I had ever seen her. "Henry is an entrepreneur, Harriet," she'd gushed. "He's in venture capital. He's so smart." I sat across from him at the dinner table, and my internal alarms began to buzz, faint but persistent. I asked the simple questions I ask everyone. "So, Henry," I said, cutting into my roast chicken, "what exactly is it you do? Entrepreneur is a broad term. Jessica mentioned venture capital." He flashed that brilliant smile. "I'm in acquisitions and emerging markets. I find opportunities, I connect the right people. It's all about vision, Harriet, all about seeing the future before it happens." It was a perfect, polished non-answer. It was the kind of word salad a person uses to sound important while saying absolutely nothing. "Which firm are you with?" I pressed gently. "Oh, I'm not with a firm," he said with a dismissive wave. "I'm independent. It gives me the flexibility to pursue the real opportunities, you know? The corporate structure is so limiting. Throughout the meal, he didn't just ask about me, he assessed me. He asked about the banking industry, my role, and how long I'd been there. Then he pivoted to my parents. He asked Charles about his pension. He asked Eliza about the house, its value, and if they'd paid it off. "Oh, we're all set, thanks to Harriet," Eliza said, beaming at me. "She handled all of it. She's our financial genius." I saw it, a flicker in Henry's eyes, a look of calculation, of assessment. It was the look of a predator that had just identified the strongest animal in the herd, the one protecting the others. He wasn't interested in Jessica. He was interested in the family's assets, and he just found the source. That night, I went home and did what I do best. I ran a check, not as a sister, but as a risk manager. I used third-party public record services, keeping my name and my bank's resources completely out of it. What I found made me feel sick. His name wasn't just Henry, it was Henryk Petrovic. He had no venture capital firm. He had no acquisitions. He had a leased car, a string of failed P.O. box businesses, and most alarmingly, 2 outstanding civil judgments against him in neighboring states. Both were for fraud. Both involved him romancing a young woman from a moderately wealthy family. He was a con artist, a parasite. He was targeting my family. He was targeting me. I wrestled with what to do. If I went to Jessica, she would accuse me of being jealous. If I went to my parents, they would accuse me of being cynical and not giving him a chance. They were so desperate for Jessica to be settled that they were blind to the flashing red lights. So I did nothing. I saved the file, I waited, I watched, I prayed I was wrong. Now, staring at the $12,000 charge on my screen, I knew I hadn't been. This wasn't just Jessica being impulsive. This was Henry making his move. He was testing the waters, seeing how much he could take, using my sister as his weapon. And Jessica's cruel words, they sounded like him. "You don't have a life." It was the kind of thing he would whisper to her, isolating her from me, painting me as the bitter, lonely spinster. My hand was steady now. The fever felt like a distant hum. This was no longer about family. It was about risk mitigation. The turning point wasn't a single moment. It was the culmination of 3 things: the $12,000 theft, the venom in my sister's voice, and the absolute, unconditional surrender of my mother. Eliza's words, "It's just money, Harriet. Let it go," severed the final thread of obligation. The passive, supportive sister was gone. The risk manager was in charge. My leverage wasn't just suspicion, it was data. The investigation had happened 3 months ago. The file I opened on my laptop was the clever trap, and they had just walked right into it. I clicked open the file labeled HPETROVIC. The contents were neat, itemized, and damning. Identity: Henry Petrovic. 2 outstanding warrants for fraud by deception. Assets: none. The car was leased, lease payments were 3 months behind. The luxury watch was a high-end replica. History: a documented pattern. He would find a family, identify the golden goose, a wealthy parent, a successful sibling, and then romance the most vulnerable member, Jessica. He would drain small amounts first, then escalate, culminating in a large investment, or, in this case, a wedding before disappearing. But I needed to connect him to this charge. Vendor: Beautiful Beginnings Reception Services. My fingers moved with practiced speed. I ran the name through the state's business registry. There it was. Beautiful Beginnings Reception Services, LLC. It was incorporated 2 months ago, just after he and Jessica announced their engagement. The listed owner and sole agent, Henryk Petrovic. The registered address, a P.O. box at a pack-and-ship store in the next town over. It was a shell company. The $12,000 hadn't gone to a venue, a caterer, or a florist. It had been funneled directly into an account that Henry controlled. He wasn't just paying for a wedding. He was stealing the wedding fund, and he was using my credit card to do it. The actual vendors, the real venue, the caterer, the orchestra, had probably been paid nothing, or just enough of a deposit to keep them from getting suspicious until the big day. This wasn't just a theft from me. This was a setup to defraud my parents and any other guest who had given them money. The fever and sickness were gone, replaced by a glacial adrenaline. I had 2 calls to make. First call, the bank. I dialed the 24/7 fraud department, a number I knew by heart. Fraud and risk, a tired voice answered. Hello, I said, my voice clear and professional. My name is Harriet Thorne. I'm an employee, ID number 774. I'm a risk manager in the corporate division. I need to report a fraudulent charge on my personal card, account number ending in 4099. The agent's tone changed instantly, snapping to attention. Ms. Thorne, yes, ma'am, what's the charge? A charge for $12,000, approved approximately 30 minutes ago. The vendor is Beautiful Beginnings Reception Services. And you did not authorize this. I did not. The card was used by a family member without my permission. But more importantly, the vendor is a confirmed shell company. I've already run the business registry check. It was incorporated 2 months ago by a Henryk Petrovic, and its registered address is a P.O. box. This is not a dispute. It is active, demonstrable fraud. There was a rapid clicking of keys. I see. You're right. The vendor's merchant code is new and has 0 transaction history before this. It's flagged. Ms. Thorne, I am freezing the card and initiating an immediate clawback of the $12,000. The funds will be returned to your account by morning, and the vendor's merchant account will be frozen pending a full investigation. Thank you, I said. That's exactly what I needed. Second call, my lawyer. I dialed the cell phone of Mr. Davies, a man who had navigated complex corporate contracts for me. Harriet, he answered, surprised. It's Friday night. I apologize, Mr. Davies. I need you on retainer, effective immediately. I'm emailing you a file. It contains evidence of fraud being perpetrated against my family by my sister's fiancé. It's about to become a very serious matter, and I need to be protected. Understood, he said, his voice all business. Send the file, I'll review it tonight. I hung up and looked at my phone. I saw Jessica's last, cruel text. My fingers hovered. I thought about the chaos that was about to unfold. I thought about the humiliation, the anger, the tears. I thought about the $12,000 clawback. I thought about the actual venue, the actual caterer, who were all expecting to be paid in the morning by Henry, with money that would no longer be there. I typed one simple reply to my sister. Beautiful's about to end. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone, rolled over, and for the first time in 3 days, I fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. I woke up the next morning, the wedding day, to a world that felt fundamentally different. The fever had broken. The air in my room was still, and for the first time in days, my lungs didn't feel like they were full of cement. The adrenaline from the night before had settled into a calm, cold resolve. I turned my phone back on. It exploded. A cascade of notifications, texts, and missed calls flooded the screen. 10 missed calls from Jessica, 15 from my mother, 5 from my father, and most interestingly, 3 from Henry. I ignored them all, got out of bed, and made myself a pot of tea. As I was sipping the first hot, soothing cup, the phone rang again. It was Henry. This time I answered. Harriet, he said. His voice was no longer the smooth, charming baritone from the dinner party. It was a tight, strained, fixer voice. Harriet, thank God. Listen, I think you made a terrible mistake. You canceled the payment to the reception hall. I didn't make a mistake, Henry, I said, my voice quiet. I reported fraud because it was fraud. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Now, Harriet, that's a very big accusation. I don't know what you're thinking, but you are seconds away from ruining your sister's big day. The vendor is here, and they're threatening to walk. They said the payment was reversed. You need to call your bank right now and tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Tell me, Henry, I said, taking another sip of tea. What's the address for Beautiful Beginnings Reception Services? The physical address, not the P.O. box. Silence, complete damning silence. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally sputtered, his voice losing its composure. It's the vendor, they handle the logistics, you're stressed, you're sick, you're not thinking clearly. On the contrary, I said, I've never thought more clearly in my life. I'm a risk manager, Henry. It's my job to know what a shell company looks like. And Beautiful Beginnings, the company registered in your name, is a textbook example. You created it 2 months ago to funnel money out of my family. He lost it. The mask of the charming prince didn't just slip, it shattered. You're just jealous, he spat, and the venom was so raw it was almost shocking. You're a bitter, lonely woman, and you can't stand to see your sister happy. You've never had anything good in your life, so you have to destroy it for everyone else. You are trying to sabotage this. It was exactly the reaction I expected. Not confusion, not a desire to problem solve or get the real vendor on the line. It was pure, narcissistic rage. He wasn't angry that the wedding was in jeopardy. He was furious that his scam was. Was that what you told her? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. That I'm a lonely, bitter woman. Did you tell her that while you were linking your Beautiful Beginnings shell company to your offshore account? He was breathing hard now, a panicked animal sound. You don't know what you're talking about, you're lying. Am I? The $12,000 I clawed back was just the beginning, wasn't it? It was the test. How much more were you planning to take? My parents' retirement? The house? You're destroying this family, he yelled. Jessica is in her dress, she's hysterical. This is all your fault. The payment is not being reissued, Henry, I said, cutting him off. The merchant account for Beautiful Beginnings is frozen. The bank's fraud department is already involved. I paused, letting the reality of his situation sink in. The actual vendors, the venue he'd only given a small deposit to, the caterer he'd promised to pay in full this morning, the florist, the string quartet, were all about to discover that the money wasn't coming. The $12,000 from my card was supposed to be his slush fund to placate them, and I had just taken it away. You should have done your research, I said softly, as I heard a wail in the background that I recognized as my sister's. You thought I was the family bank. You didn't realize I was the family auditor. I hung up. The first domino had just hit the second. The chain reaction was going to be spectacular. I went to my CL. Set and started to get dressed. The next hour was a symphony of chaos, all of it playing out on my phone. I let the calls go to voicemail, listening to them with a clinical detachment as I showered and dressed in my most severe, professional suit. First, my mother, Eliza, she wasn't placating anymore. She was sobbing, hysterical. Harriet, I don't know what you did, but the venue just locked the doors. They padlocked the garden. They said the payment check bounced. They're taking the chairs away. Harriet, fix this. You have to fix this. Next, my father, Charles. He was apoplectic, his voice cracking with a rage I had never heard from him. Harriet Thorne, you have humiliated this family. Humiliated us. Your sister is on the floor in her gown. The guests are arriving. What did you do? You call that bank, you call that venue, you pay them whatever they want. This is your sister. Then the texts from Henry. They came in a rapid, desperate volley, the mask of the victim giving way to the panic of the con artist. This is all your fault, you're a monster. Jessica is a mess, you did this to her, just send the money to my personal account. $20K, I can fix this, I'll pay them in cash. The classic plan B, when the shell company fails, pivot to a direct wire transfer. He was sloppy, he was desperate, he was done. While they were all imploding, I was building my case. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, called, and this time I answered. Harriet, he said, his voice crisp. This is deeper than we thought. The P.O. box for Beautiful Beginnings is linked to 2 other defunct event planning companies. Both were dissolved after multiple civil complaints. And I found another victim, a family in Ohio. My blood ran cold. He's done this before. Exactly the same, Mr. Davies confirmed. Romanced the daughter, set up a fake vendor, promised to handle all the wedding finances, and disappeared with the entire wedding fund 2 days before the ceremony. The woman's father is a doctor. He's been trying to get the authorities to build a case against him for a year. He's willing to talk. He's emailing me his entire file. He's not just a con artist, I whispered. He's a serial predator. He is. The $12,000 you just clawed back was likely his getaway fund. He was never going to pay those vendors. He was going to let your sister have her perfect day, and then, while they were on their honeymoon, he was going to empty every account he could get his hands on and vanish. The sickness returned for a moment, a wave of nausea. He wasn't just going to rob us. He was going to rob Jessica of her dignity, her future, and leave her stranded and humiliated. I'm on my way, I said. Harriet, are you sure? The police. I'm sure, I said. This isn't just about the money anymore. My sister is still in that hotel with him. She's still under his spell. I grabbed my briefcase, the printed-out file inside, and walked out the door. I drove to the luxury hotel where the wedding was supposed to take place. It was a circus. Guests were standing in the lobby, confused, angry. The floral arrangements were being wheeled out the front door by a furious-looking vendor. I found my family in a private suite upstairs. The door was ajar. Jessica was crumpled on the floor, a heap of white lace and tulle, mascara running in black rivers down her face. Eliza was hovering over her, uselessly. Charles was pacing by the window, his face a blotchy, furious red. And then there was Henry. He was in his tuxedo on his phone, yelling, "I don't care what your bank says, the money is there." I walked in. The room fell silent. "You," Henry snarled, pointing a finger at me. "You did this." Henryk Petrovic. The name dropped into the room like a stone. Henry froze. His face went chalk white. Jessica stopped crying, her head snapping up. "What?" Jessica whispered. "What did you call him?" "That's his name," I said calmly, walking to the center of the room. "Or at least one of them. I'm on the phone with my lawyer, Mr. Davies. He's currently on the other line with a doctor from Ohio. His daughter was also engaged to a Henry. He also used a shell company to steal her family's money. Sound familiar?" Jessica looked at Henry, her eyes wide with the first crack of genuine fear. "Henry, what is she talking about? Tell her she's lying, tell her." Henry looked at me, then at Jessica. He tried for the smile, the charm. It was a grotesque, failing mask. "Babe, she's poisoning you, your own sister. She's always been jealous of us. Are you going to believe her or me?" "Believe me," I said, my voice cutting through his. "I have the bank statements. I have the police reports from Ohio. I have the incorporation papers for Beautiful Beginnings, registered to you, at a P.O. box. I opened my briefcase and took out the file. And I have the wire transfer requests you sent to my parents." Eliza and Charles both froze. "What?" See. Charles said, "The $20,000 you gave him for the all-inclusive honeymoon package," I asked them. "That account was emptied 60 minutes ago. He was already gone." The spell didn't just break, it exploded. The suite was a tinderbox of raw emotion. My father, Charles, looked like he'd been struck. The honeymoon, he said it was a special deal, it had to be paid in cash. "Of course he did," I said, my voice holding no pity, only fact. "Mom, Dad, he wasn't just after my $12,000. He was after your retirement. The $20,000 you gave him, that was just the start." My mother, Eliza, finally looked at Henry, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. "Henry, you told us that was a refundable deposit." "He's lying about all of it," Henry roared, finally seeing his escape route and my parents' money vanishing. He was no longer a prince. He was a cornered animal. He lunged for Jessica, grabbing her arm. "Babe, let's go. We don't need this. We can go to the courthouse. We can leave all this behind." He was pulling her, trying to drag her toward the door. But Jessica was staring at his hand, the one gripping her arm, his knuckles white. "The honeymoon," she said, her voice a hollow whisper. You said it was non-refundable. You told me you had to pay in cash." She looked up, not at him, but at me. Her eyes were no longer angry, just empty. "You told me she was jealous. You told me she was a lonely old maid who hated me." "She is," Henry shouted, yanking her arm. "She's trying to ruin our lives." "No," Jessica said. She pulled her arm free with a sudden, violent twist. The sound of lace ripping filled the room. "She's not she's right." She looked at me, her face a mask of ruined makeup and devastating realization. You knew." "I knew," I confirmed. Henry saw it all slipping away. The money, the woman, the escape. He made a bolt for the door. "You're all crazy. You're the crazy ones." He threw the door open, ready to run, and stopped dead. Standing in the hallway were two uniformed police officers. Henry froze. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and pure, unadulterated panic. I just gave a small, sad nod. "When I called my lawyer, Mr. Davies, he didn't just call the doctor in Ohio. He called the local police. He told them a known con artist, with outstanding warrants, was currently at this hotel and in possession of $20,000 obtained by fraud. He advised them to be here to prevent a disturbance." One of the officers stepped forward. "Mr. Henryk Petrovic." Henry's shoulders slumped. The fight was gone. The charm was gone. He was just a small, tacky man in an expensive, rented tuxedo. As they put his hands behind his back, he looked at Jessica. "Babe," he pleaded, tell them this is a mistake." But Jessica just stared at him, her face completely blank, as if she was seeing a ghost. My mother, Eliza, let out a low, terrible wail and sank onto one of the hotel beds. My father, Charles, just stared at the open doorway, at the last of his retirement savings being led away in handcuffs. The public humiliation was complete. Confused wedding guests were peering down the hall, their phones out, whispering. My sister's perfect day had collapsed into a public spectacle of crime and deception. I stood in the center of the room, holding my file. I felt no triumph, no joy, I just felt tired, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. The weight of my family, their expectations, their demands, their endless, draining need, it had been lifted. The officer looked at me. "Ma'am, we'll need your statement down at the station." "Of course," I said. I turned to my family, to the ruins of their perfect day. Jessica finally looked at me, her eyes bottomless with shame. "Harriet." I just shook my head, put the file back in my briefcase, and walked out the door. The downfall of Henryk Petrovic was as swift as it was total. The case was open and shut. The file I had built, combined with the irrefutable bank records of the shell company and the wire fraud against my parents, was damning. But the true nail in his coffin was the testimony from the doctor in Ohio. Faced with a multi-state federal case, Henry pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 5 to 7 years for fraud, theft by deception, and wiretapping. He had apparently recorded conversations with my parents. Beautiful Beginnings was dissolved, and my parents were informed that their $20,000 was unrecoverable. It was gone, wired to an offshore account the second it landed. I went back to my life. I finished my recovery from pneumonia. I went back to work. I changed all my bank accounts and all my numbers. The emergency line was permanently closed. For weeks there was silence. I didn't call them. They didn't call me. The quiet in my house was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. Then, one rainy Saturday, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Jessica. She looked smaller. She wasn't wearing her influencer uniform of bright colors and heavy makeup. She was in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked her age, 26 and terribly young. We stood in silence for a moment. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I stepped aside. She walked into my living room, the one she'd only ever seen for brief, transactional visits. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. They said he got 7 years," she said to her knees. "I heard," I replied, sitting in the armchair opposite her. He cleaned out my savings account," she whispered. "Everything. It was only $3,000, but it was all I had." "I know," I said. The police had told me. Her shoulders began to shake. A tear, then another, dropped onto her jeans. These weren't the theatrical tears from the wedding day. They were quiet, ugly, and real. I said those horrible things to you, about you not having a life. I didn't say anything, I just waited. I'm so sorry, Harriet. She finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I'm so sorry. You were just trying to protect me. You've always been protecting me. And I treated you like an ATM, like nothing. You did, I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact hanging in the air between us. He told me you were jealous, she choked out. He said you wanted to keep me small, under your thumb. He said you were just a bitter, lonely. And I believed him, because it was easier than admitting I was a failure. I looked at my sister, truly saw her, perhaps for the first time. Not as the golden child, not as my burden, but as a young, foolish, and profoundly broken person who had been conned, just as my parents had been. The money's gone, Jess, I said softly. All of it. Mom and Dad's too. I can't fix that. I know, she sobbed. I don't want you to. I don't know what to do. I got up, went to the kitchen, and came back with a box of tissues. I sat down next to her on the sofa. It's going to be hard, I said, handing her one. You're going to have to get a real job. She nodded, blowing her nose. I know. She looked around my quiet, orderly living room. I applied at a dentist's office for a receptionist job. A small flicker of something, pride, perhaps, stirred in my chest. Can you teach me? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't know how to do anything. Can you teach me? How to make a budget, like a real one? I looked at her, my broken, humbled, and finally real little sister. And for the first time, I didn't feel resentment. I felt a faint, fragile sense of hope. Yes, I said, I can do that. It wasn't a perfect ending. My parents were devastated, financially and emotionally. They were learning, with difficulty, how to live on their actual, limited retirement. Our family dinners were strained, but they were also, for the first time, honest. I closed my laptop at 5 p.m. most days now. I was taking walks. I had reconnected with old friends. My life, the one Jessica had mocked, was finally my own. I was no longer the family's bank, their auditor, or their fixer. I was just Harriet. And I finally had a life to spend on myself.